Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, give a like, and don't forget to leave a comment. Enjoy watching.
They always tell you that when it happens, you'll know. Like some gut-deep instinct will kick in, some lizard brain survival mechanism that whispers, this is it, something's not right. But I didn't feel a damn thing walking into that seventh-floor glass conference room that Friday morning, no hint of doom, no twinge of paranoia. I was early, even had time to refill my travel mug with that burnt hazelnut office coffee I pretended to like. I was clean-shaven, in a decent shirt, not the cheap ones, one of my better ones, the kind with cuffs that don't shrink in the dryer. I was sharp, or I thought I was. Josh Whitman, the CEO, was already seated when I walked in. That was the first red flag in hindsight. Josh wasn't the kind of guy who ever showed up first. He liked making people wait. Like the little power games, sending Slack messages during your presentations, stepping out of meetings right before you made your point, asking quick favors at 4:45 on a Friday. But there he was, already sitting with his tablet folded neatly in front of him, the screen off, hands folded like he was posing for some LinkedIn stock photo shoot titled Empathetic Yet Visionary Leadership. Hey, Mark, he said, using the tone people reserve for dogs they're about to put down. Thanks for coming up. I gave him a half smile and sat across from him. I didn't bring my laptop, didn't expect to need it. This was supposed to be a check-in, one of those quarterly status things where he pretends to listen while I summarize 16 years of work into a digestible 4-slide deck. Only this time, there were no slides, no whiteboard. Just that glass-walled room, him and me, and that damn tablet he hadn't turned on. He didn't waste much time. That's something I'll give him credit for. Mark, I'll be honest, this is tough, he said, though his eyes were dry as paper. You've been an incredible asset. Everyone respects you. I personally admire the legacy you've built here. I remember raising one eyebrow just slightly, because the way he was front-loading compliments felt a little too much like foreplay before a murder. But as we've been defining our future vision for the company, he continued, we realized that some parts of our leadership structure weren't aligned with where we're going. Aligned. That word. I heard it a lot lately, mostly in sentences that ended with someone cleaning out their desk. I'm sorry to say, he said, locking eyes with me like he'd practiced it in the mirror, that today will be your last day with us. I didn't say a word. Not at first. I just sat there, the words not sinking in all at once, but in fragments, like slow drops of cold water leaking down your back. 16 years. Over 36 hires trained. 21 projects led. 9 failed product launches turned around. And suddenly, I was being packaged into a neat little folder marked Legacy Costs. I nodded. That's all I did. Just nodded slowly, stood up, and offered him a handshake. He took it, maybe surprised I didn't fight back. But the truth is, I wasn't stunned. Not entirely. There had been signs. Little things I ignored. My budget trimmed without explanation, meetings canceled without rescheduling, suddenly not being looped into strategy sessions I used to lead. There was even a new kid, a cousin of someone, I think shadowing my team 2 weeks ago. When I asked Josh about it, he said it was just exploratory and gave me that grin people use when they're lying but don't think it matters. I went back to my office. My name was still on the door. My team was out at lunch, which was just as well. I didn't need any speeches or sympathy. I sat down at my desk, opened my drawer, and started packing my things. A couple of notebooks, my favorite pen, that old photo of my daughter from her 6th grade graduation. She's in college now. Time flies when you're busy building something you thought mattered. There wasn't much else to take. My files were all on the cloud. My ID badge beeped one last time as I exited the building. I didn't slam any doors, didn't yell, didn't burn anything down. I just walked out, got in my car, and drove home in silence. That night, my wife made lasagna. She didn't say much when I told her. Just placed her hand on my shoulder and asked, do you want to talk about it now or later? I said later. Then I sat on the couch with a beer, staring at the wall like a guy watching his own funeral highlights. It's funny, isn't it? You give them everything, weekends, vacations, late nights, family dinners missed for conference calls, and when they're done with you, it's not even personal. It's strategy. It's realignment. It's that damn word again, vision. The next morning, I woke up early out of habit. No alarm, just the muscle memory of decades. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my email out of curiosity, not expecting much. But that's when the first one came in. A forwarded message from someone in engineering, subject line, FYI, you didn't hear this from me. Then another, and another. By noon, my inbox looked like a dam had broken. People from all corners of the company, people I didn't even think liked me, were sending me copies of emails, chat transcripts, memos, project files. Every single one dripping with quiet guilt and nervous righteousness. Like they were confessing to a priest who'd just been excommunicated. Apparently, my exit wasn't just sudden, it was planned. And not just recently. They've been greasing the wheels for months. Quiet budget cuts, project shifts, even falsified performance review summaries that I never saw but were leaked to a few team leads to justify sidelining me. One line stood out in bold from an email dated 2 months ago. We need to reposition Mark before Q2 numbers go public. Optics matter. I leaned back in my chair, reading that line over and over. So it wasn't about vision. It was about optics. And I was done playing optics. Tell me this. What would you do if your boss stabbed you in the back with a smile, handed you your dignity in a cardboard box, and expected you to disappear quietly? Be honest. Have you ever dreamed of getting revenge on a manager like that? Because I wasn't dreaming anymore. I was starting to plan. It started slow, like a leaky faucet dripping in the dark, annoying enough to notice but not yet urgent. The first email came in Saturday morning, just after 9, from someone in engineering I hadn't spoken to in months. Subject line was vague, just so you know. I opened it expecting condolences or maybe some half-hearted version of "It's not fair, man." Instead, I found a forwarded thread between 2 team leads I used to supervise, timestamped from a week before I got canned. They were discussing how to communicate the leadership transition to the dev group without creating panic, and how Mark's departure would be messaged as an opportunity to modernize the management structure. That phrase, Mark's departure, was being tossed around days before Josh sat across from me and pretended it was a gut-wrenching decision. My departure had been scheduled, scripted, and baked into the damn strategy deck before I even walked into that room. I sat back in my chair, heart thudding with that mix of anger and disbelief that comes when you realize you've been made a fool. But I didn't delete it. I starred the message, filed it in a folder I quickly named, "Oh Really Now," and moved on with my day, thinking maybe that was it. Maybe one guy had a guilty conscience and needed to unburden himself. I was wrong. By early afternoon, the trickle had become a slow, steady stream. A project manager from marketing I barely knew forwarded me a Slack screenshot showing a conversation where my name was tossed around like some artifact from a previous era, something to be phased out for optics. That word again, optics. It kept coming up like a bad meal. Then a finance analyst I mentored 2 years back sent over a spreadsheet marked Leadership Optimization, Phase 2, listing names, roles, estimated exit timelines, and projected costs. My name was at the top of the list, highlighted in yellow like a caution flag. Next to it, Q1 removal, low resistance expected. Low resistance? I had to laugh. I'd spent 16 years building systems, cleaning up messes, training people who got promoted past me, and they figured I'd just take the hit and stay quiet. And maybe I would have. Maybe I would have let it go, told myself that life moves on, that it's just business. But then came the email that lit the fuse. It came from Alicia, a former HR rep who'd moved to the Midwest office last year after a demotion that nobody talked about publicly. She was blunt. No warm-up, no small talk. I got pushed out after raising concerns about how Josh's cousin was being fast-tracked through management training despite failing 2 modules. Just saying, he's the one taking over your old team, right? I saw some things back then. If you ever need someone to back you up, I'm here. Also, check the attachments. The attachments included onboarding documents for Brett Whitman, a name that hadn't been mentioned directly to me until now. 28 years old. No prior leadership experience. No technical background. A single internship at some digital branding agency, followed by a strategy associate title created just 6 months before my firing. His file read like someone wrote it with the sole purpose of pretending he'd done more than fill out a coffee order spreadsheet and smile during Zoom calls. And then there was the smoking gun, an internal memo from Josh to the board, dated 3 months earlier. It detailed a youth-forward restructure initiative and included phrases like replacing legacy personnel with dynamic, future-focused talent, and minimizing cultural friction by reducing intergenerational disconnect. I wasn't a person in that document. I was a risk factor, a potential obstacle to millennial agile transformation, which, for the record, is a term so vague and meaningless I wanted to punch my monitor just reading it. The worst part wasn't even that they did it. It was how smugly they thought they could get away with it. How carefully they worded every message, every deck, every whisper between boardrooms, trusting that people like me, guys in their 50s with mortgages and college tuition bills, would just take the loss and disappear. But here's what they forgot. When you work somewhere that long, you don't just build projects, you build people. And some of those people remember what you did for them. Some of them don't like what they're seeing now. And when the tide turns, it turns fast. By Sunday evening, I had over 30 emails, most of them forwarded chains or confidential docs never meant to reach my eyes. People from compliance, sales, even 2 former interns who'd gone on to other companies but still had old logins they used to check the internal portal. One of them sent me a screenshot of a performance review for Brett written before he even started on my team. It used language like proactive leader, clear communication, and strategic mindset, all things I'd been told I needed to work on during my final review last quarter. I didn't sleep much that night. I wasn't anxious. I was alert, hyper-focused. I hadn't felt that alive in years. Somewhere between the spreadsheet, the HR memo, and the fake performance reviews, something clicked into place. This wasn't a simple layoff. This was an orchestrated transition designed to install someone incompetent but loyal and quietly remove the guy who might ask too many questions. So I started downloading, archiving, cross-referencing timestamps, building a timeline. I opened an old spreadsheet template I used for project retrospectives and titled it Operation Backstab Master Thread. Every name went in. Every document got tagged. I wasn't exactly sure what I was building yet, but I knew this. If they wanted me gone because I was too old school to be manipulated, they were about to find out what old school really looked like. I wasn't going to send angry emails or post a whiny LinkedIn rant. I wasn't going to call a lawyer just yet or stage a protest in front of headquarters. No, I was going to do something far more dangerous. I was going to wait, watch, learn, and when the time was right, I was going to make sure that everything they thought was buried came right back up to the surface. Slow, cold, and loud. At some point, the shock wears off and what's left in its place is something colder, heavier, and much more useful clarity. The kind of clarity you only get when the bullshit fog finally lifts and you start seeing the patterns that were right in front of you the whole time. That Sunday night, I sat in my garage with the overhead light humming above me, surrounded by dusty storage bins, half-used paint cans, and a folding table covered in email printouts, scribbled notes, and my laptop. It looked like a crime scene. It was. I just hadn't realized I was the victim until now. I started with the timelines. 6 months back, I remembered being pulled into a meeting where Josh and a few of the New Vision guys talked about shifting our platform strategy. At the time, I didn't love the direction. They wanted to cut features that our older clients depended on just to make the UI look sexier for new demos, but I played along. I said my piece, offered a few compromises, and left it at that. What I didn't know then was that, within 2 weeks, those same features I had warned them not to cut had been removed from the product roadmap entirely, without my name on any document. I cross-referenced that with our product performance data, and, sure enough, the first user complaints started coming in about 2 months later, right when I was on vacation with my wife in Oregon. I remembered the trip because I got 3 urgent calls about bugs that had somehow slipped through staging. That had never happened on my watch before. I blamed my second-in-command at the time, a guy named Colin, who always seemed a little too eager to take charge when I wasn't around. I called him, told him to walk me through what happened. He gave me the usual, something about a missed integration test, QA being overworked, and timelines being tight. I accepted it back then because I didn't want to believe the alternative, that someone had made sure it failed while I wasn't looking. Now, staring at the Git logs and internal task trackers I still had access to through my archived credentials, I saw the truth. A commit had been pushed 2 days before the bug surfaced from Colin's login, undoing a patch we'd previously tested and approved. It wasn't even subtle. It was labeled hotfix rollback, which made it sound urgent, necessary. But it wasn't. It was a deliberate move to break something under my name. And I had the timestamps to prove it. And it wasn't just code. Financial projections for my division had mysteriously shifted in the internal board review deck from what I'd presented. I kept copies of my original numbers, because that's what old guys like me do. We save things, just in case. My version showed steady but modest growth, realistic forecasting. The deck presented to the board had those numbers swapped for worse, lower margins, bloated expenses, missed targets. Things that made me look sloppy, behind the times, or worse, dishonest. Only problem was, I never approved that deck. I was told minor formatting changes had been made by Josh's new strategic ops hire, an intern director named Melanie who spoke like a TED Talk transcript and knew exactly nothing about how our business actually ran. There were notes in her revision log that read, Slide 6, adjust Mark's cost projections to reflect aggressive market conditions. I stared at that line for 5 straight minutes, not because it was shocking, but because it was so neatly detached from reality, so surgical in its dishonesty. They hadn't just fired me. They'd rewritten the record to make it look like I deserved it. And then I found the quarterly all-hands call notes buried in a shared folder I hadn't opened in months, where Josh had introduced new initiatives to revitalize underperforming verticals. I remembered that call. I'd tuned in from home, sitting in my kitchen with a mug of cold coffee, listening to him talk in circles about transformation, youth culture, and breaking with the past. At the time, I thought it was fluff, another buzzword salad. But in those notes, there was an internal tag under the budget section. Legacy division, reduce resource allocation by 15% over 2 quarters. That's when it hit me. They'd been shrinking my budget without telling me. No wonder my teams were suddenly scrambling. No wonder I had to fight for every hour of overtime, every junior dev hire. The game wasn't fair because I was never meant to win. I was just supposed to hang around long enough to take the fall when things dipped, which they would, because someone else was quietly pulling the floor out from under me. I thought about Brett again, the golden boy, Josh's cousin, the fresh-faced messiah who was supposed to modernize what I'd built. I hadn't met him in person more than once or twice. He seemed harmless at first, quiet, polite, always taking notes but never asking questions. Now I saw that for what it was, surveillance. He was cataloging what I did, who I relied on, what systems I touched. Not learning from me, copying me, preparing to replace me. And he wasn't alone. Colin had clearly played a role, Melanie doctored the board decks, and Josh had orchestrated the entire campaign like a general planning a war against someone who didn't even know they were the enemy. The worst part? They probably thought I was too checked out to notice. Too old, too tired, too corporate. But they'd forgotten something crucial. I came up in a time before Slack and culture decks. I came up with people who documented everything, backed up twice, and knew how to follow the money. I don't need your cloud analytics and dashboards. I've got records. Paper. Proof. This wasn't just a firing. This was character assassination with a smile. This was them staging a controlled demolition and hoping nobody noticed the guy inside the building. But I noticed. And I wasn't about to let the wreckage go quietly. If they wanted a clean narrative, they should have picked someone who didn't know how to follow the cracks in the walls. Because once you know where to look, you start seeing the whole damn building is crooked. And once you see that, you don't just walk away. You make sure everyone else sees it too. By Monday morning, the anger had calcified into something sharper, something harder, cooler, and a hell of a lot more dangerous than outrage. I wasn't pacing anymore, and I wasn't throwing coffee mugs across the room like I did the day I read that Q1 removal, low resistance expected note. No. Now I was sitting at my kitchen table with a legal pad, my laptop, and 3 pins lined up in a row, plotting like a man who finally figured out the game isn't won by yelling. It's won by knowing the rules better than the people who think they invented them. I called Julian Matthews that morning, which was both predictable and extremely calculated. Julian wasn't just any lawyer, he was the guy. The kind of attorney you call when you don't want justice, you want strategy. We worked together briefly over a decade ago during a messy IP dispute with a former contractor who tried to claim he'd built part of our back-end infrastructure from scratch. Julian had shredded the guy in mediation, but never once raised his voice. That's what I remembered about him, his quiet precision. He was like a surgeon with a briefcase and a grudge. Mark, he said when he picked up, already knowing it wasn't a social call. I figured I'd be hearing from you soon. I didn't waste time. I laid it out, the emails, the altered documents, the strategic budget cuts, the manufactured failure points, and, most damning of all, the memo about Brett's installation that made it clear my removal wasn't just personal, it was premeditated. He asked questions. A lot of them. Some were legal, some were tactical, and some were just Julian doing what he did best, pulling the thread to see where it unraveled. Then he said it. You know, if you're right about the IPO misrepresentations, that's not just corporate sabotage, that's an SEC problem. That line hit like a bell in my skull. The kind of clear, hard sound that cuts through the noise of self-doubt and resentment. Because it meant I wasn't just an old guy who got canned for being too slow to adapt. I was a witness to a potential crime. And that changes everything. We talked whistleblower protections. We talked chain of custody, document preservation, retaliation shields, and whether or not the evidence I had could hold up if it went beyond corporate HR and into federal oversight territory. Julian was careful, measured. He didn't promise revenge. He promised leverage. So I followed his advice. I didn't go to war, not yet. I started with a few carefully crafted emails, all sent from my personal account, all written with just enough ambiguity to make people nervous without making me legally vulnerable. The first one went to the company's general counsel, a buttoned-up Harvard type named Olivia Carter, who I always suspected cared more about board optics than internal ethics. Subject line: need clarification on ethics protocol, board materials. The body of the email was short. I referenced a few inconsistencies I'd noticed between internal forecasts and what had been presented externally. I asked if updates made to divisional performance data by non-financial personnel were in line with corporate ethics policy. I attached one spreadsheet, the altered one, and mentioned, very politely, that I still had copies of my originals. I didn't accuse. I just asked. Then I CC'd the entire board. And I BCC'd 3 former colleagues, 2 in finance, 1 in PR, and a guy named Ryan Dorsey, who now wrote for a niche but influential digital finance journal that had broken a couple tech IPO stories over the last year. Ryan and I had shared a bottle of scotch at a launch party 5 years ago and talked candidly about corporate gaslighting. I figured he'd remember me. And if he didn't, the attached file names would get his attention. Then I waited. Not passively, of course. While the digital dust settled, I started compiling a master packet, Julian's suggestion, of everything I had. Timelines, altered decks, Slack transcripts, conflicting memos, and a lovely little comparison chart I made myself titled Brett versus Mark, Experience versus Nepotism. It was petty, sure, but it was also devastating. Because when you lay it all out, years of leadership, system rebuilds, cross-department mentoring, successful launches, against a guy whose biggest claim to fame was building a brand culture Bible full of Pinterest quotes and nonsense, the story tells itself. Midweek, I got my first response, not from Olivia, not from HR, but from one of the quieter board members, an older guy named Arnold Bell who'd always treated me with something resembling genuine respect. His email was short. Appreciate the materials. We'll follow up. That's all he said. But 2 days later, the real shift came. The company's investor relations page went dark for about 48 hours, listed as under update. That was unusual. Then came the internal email leak, not from me, mind you, but from someone inside who posted a redacted thread to a private business forum where IPO watchers congregate. The post was titled Questionable Forecast Adjustments Ahead of Q3 Earnings, and it featured one of the same graphs I'd shared. By Friday, the press had caught a whiff. No headlines, not yet, but the rumors were circulating. Josh canceled his next all hands, citing a strategic refocus. Brett deleted his LinkedIn profile for 3 days, then brought it back with a stripped-down bio that no longer included Head of Innovation. And me? I stayed quiet. I didn't gloat. I didn't post anything, didn't call anyone, didn't even tell my wife just yet. I went to the park in the afternoon, took a walk, bought a newspaper, sat on a bench like a retired man who had nothing but time and memory. Because this wasn't about winning quickly. It was about unraveling them slowly. They thought they dropped me off at the exit ramp, hands washed clean, no blowback. What they didn't count on was that I didn't need their job anymore to make myself heard. What they didn't realize was that the guy they thought was obsolete still knew how to lay a minefield with a smile. And I wasn't done planting them. Not even close. It didn't blow up all at once like some dramatic Netflix climax where the villain is marched out in handcuffs under fluorescent lights and someone yells, "I knew it," from the copy room. That's not how real corporate collapses happen, especially when everyone involved has expensive PR reps, golden parachutes, and lawyers who can turn fraud into miscommunication with a few keystrokes. No, it started with a whisper, an anonymous leak about inconsistencies in reporting structure tied to a high-profile IPO, buried halfway down a Friday afternoon finance blog, just enough to start the engine without waking the neighbors. But that whisper got picked up. It always does. And once the first thread was pulled, the rest of the sweater unraveled at a slow but completely unstoppable pace. By the following Wednesday, the company released a tightly worded, perfectly sterile press statement. In light of evolving internal dynamics and recent questions surrounding operational transparency, the anticipated IPO of Stratwell Solutions will be postponed pending a routine strategic review. Anyone who's worked long enough in the trenches knows what strategic review really means. Someone screwed up, and someone else is being sacrificed before it hits the front page. Inside sources, meaning friends of friends who still had skin in the game, started texting me off the record. Apparently, the board had entered what they called containment mode. Olivia from legal stopped showing up to meetings and had taken some personal time. Josh was spotted leaving the office through the service elevator. Brett, dear golden boy Brett, was now on leave, while they reassessed team structure and evaluated legacy knowledge continuity. Translation: the kid had no idea what he was doing and couldn't even bluff his way through the systems I built. Turns out, vision isn't much help when your platform backend's on fire and the only guy who can fix it is outside the firewall, sipping coffee and watching it burn. I wasn't bitter anymore. Honestly, I felt clean for the first time in years. I didn't miss the constant 7 a.m. sync calls or the passive-aggressive Slack threads or the quarterly reviews dressed up as motivational speeches. I'd started consulting, not a lot, just enough to keep my brain moving and my schedule free. Small companies, startups with scrappy teams and no boardroom politics, real people building real things without a single deck about vision pillars or disruption ecosystems. I worked from home, made my own hours, and finally remembered what it felt like to sleep without a phone charging next to my head like a loaded gun. There was a part of me that thought that would be the end of it. I'd made my point. I'd left my mark. The company got a black eye, Josh was bleeding credibility, and I had my dignity, my receipts, and a clear conscience. But, of course, it wasn't over, not quite. It was a Thursday afternoon when I got the call. I was in my garage again, organizing an old toolbox I hadn't touched in a decade, listening to some blues guitar and sipping iced tea. My phone buzzed with an unknown number, and against my better judgment, I picked up. Mark Talbot, the voice asked, low and professional, like someone who'd practiced this opening in front of a mirror. Yes, I said, already halfway expecting some new legal flare-up or a last-ditch apology attempt. This is Arnold Bell. I sit on the board at Stratwell. I was wondering if you might be available for a coffee chat sometime next week. Strictly informal, of course. There was a pause, long enough for me to feel the implications hanging in the air like smoke after a gunshot. I remembered Arnold. He'd been the only board member who ever looked me in the eye during those town hall meetings, the only one who didn't clap like a trained seal every time Josh rattled off another jargon-laced vision statement. I assume this isn't a social call, I said, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make my point. No, he said, clearing his throat. Let's just say, we're reevaluating some internal decisions and wanted your perspective. Off the record, of course. I told him I'd think about it, hung up, and stared at the wall for a full minute. There it was, that strange, familiar burn in my chest, not quite anger, not quite pride. Just that cold, clear feeling that comes when the people who wrote you off realize they might have thrown away the wrong man. But I didn't say yes. Not yet. I needed to think. Because here's the truth, revenge, if you even want to call it that, doesn't come in one big glorious moment. It comes in the quiet. It comes when the people who tried to erase you start trying to remember your number. It comes when the system that chewed you up starts showing cracks, and the new guy they propped up with spreadsheets and borrowed charm is nowhere to be found. Did I want justice? Sure. But I also wanted to sleep at night. And I could. That was more than I can say during those last 2 years working under Josh's vision. So I stood there, holding a rusted wrench, staring out the window at the fading afternoon light, thinking about that coffee. Thinking about what I might say, what I might not. Because some things don't need to be spoken aloud to make a point. Sometimes, the silence says enough. And here's where I'll leave you. Did I do the right thing? Or did I just get even? Was I exposing fraud or settling a score? Maybe both. Maybe that's the price of staying quiet for too long. You forget where the line is between justice and revenge. And by the time you remember, you're already across it, walking calmly, smiling to yourself, knowing damn well you'll never go back.